Welcome to the future of payroll and workforce management insights by HR.com, your go-to resource for insights into payroll and workforce management. From navigating compliance and technology trends to exploring the latest in global payroll solutions, we're here to keep you ahead of the curve. Join us as we dive into the forces reshaping payroll and share practical strategies to optimize your workforce management. Let's get started. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this latest episode of Future of Payroll and Workforce Management, a podcast here at HR.com, where I am your host. My name is Brent Skinner. I do several things at HR.com, but this isn't about me today. Today is about my guest, as always, and today's guest is Shail Niazi, who is Chief Culture Officer at Clean Valley CIC. Welcome, Shail.
Thank you, Brent. Great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Now, Clean Valley CIC is a company focusing on ocean technology and related sustainability, and looking forward to you sharing just a little bit more about what that means with our audience. But also, if you would please just share with our audience before we get into today's topic, which is super duper interesting, and just to give people a taste, it's culture isn't vibes, it's collective ownership. And AI is about to stress test it. Really interesting stuff we're going to be getting into today. But maybe you could just share with us first, as I ask all my guests, what got you into this line of work? What's your passion in this space? What gets you going every day, Shail?
Perfect. Now that's a very good question to start with. Uh, I've always been associated with human resource as a function all throughout my career. I started off with companies like Philip Morris and Starwood Hotels, where I did most of my initial learning. And then from there onwards, embarked on an entrepreneurial journey over the period of past 12 to 15 years, I've been acting more as an entrepreneur. And it's during that journey I've realized that 80% of your success depends on how effectively your organization functions, and maybe 20% is where you add value in terms of technology or some secrets that you build your platform around. So if 80% of your success depends on your people and your processes and how effectively they work together, naturally that's something that I've felt close to my heart. And as I was transitioning from my last entrepreneurial journey into a new foray, I came across Clean Valley as a very exciting sort of an opportunity. It's not every day that an organization, let alone a startup, advertises to hire for the role of a chief culture officer. And so here I was, fresh out of my previous startup. I had some time on my hand and I was looking for my next big move, and here this position was in front of me, which was speaking of a lot of experiences that I've had in the past. So it naturally intrigued me, and the more I spoke to the founders in that company, I realized that their vision about how they want to grow their company is aligned with how I think organizations should evolve. And that's how I ended up taking a role of a chief culture officer, even though I wasn't intending to. The role itself was very attractive to say no to.
That's interesting. It's really cool to kind of almost stumble into a chief culture officer role, something to do. That's really interesting. I like that. And that might be a good segue. Today we're going to talk a little bit, about what does a chief culture officer actually do, especially inside a fast-moving scientific startup with global ambition. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about, what it means to actually make culture happen. It doesn't just happen on its, well, a culture you might not want it will happen on your own, but if you approach culture with intentionality, then you can kind of manage it. And that's probably not the right word to use, but you can shape it and make it what you want it to be. So let's get into this. We were talking the other day when we were discussing this episode and what kind of things we wanted to talk about, and you defined culture as collective ownership. So maybe you could explain to our audience, what does that mean in practice? How do you know it's actually happening?
Perfect. So I think one of the biggest misconception people have with culture is that it is a single man's job to disseminate a certain value set across the organization and then enforce it. That's not really how cultures work. Cultures exist regardless of any intentional effort being put into actions. So they just exist regardless of that. What I mean by collective ownership, and this word I picked up during my past experiences working with people, is that you can never engage people from your own point of view.
Mm.
You can always engage them from their point of view. So in order for you to really have them do what you want them to do or personify a value set that you want them to personify, series of engagement activities, training sessions, webinars can be a means to an end, but it cannot be your core philosophy. It's where you put people ahead of your own decisions, let them take those decisions, and then own the failures if they come with those decisions. And that is where collective ownership starts developing. I can start off my day by assigning a series of tasks to everyone in the team, or I can start the same day by saying, what do you feel is blocking you today, and how can I help you unlock it? And that whole dynamic changes the conversation. This does not require you to send them on engagement activities, it requires you to trust your team a little bit more and trust yourself a little bit less. And if you can strike that fine balance, you would see magic happen. People are smart inherently, they hold themselves back because other people within the organization acts as blockers for them. So as a chief culture officer, my role is actually to disappear, or what I call as managing by walking around. So I just walk around, or in a virtual setting, I talk to people and I encourage them to share their ideas and how I, as a conduit to the leadership, can enable them to do that. And that whole activity does not require any investment in terms of time. It just requires investment in terms of trust and some other non-tangibles.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And one of the things I'm getting from that is just this idea that when you want to shape culture in an organization from a leadership standpoint, right? From the point of being a leader, from the perspective of being a leader in that organization, it's not. You know, I had someone else on the podcast last year who talked about, sometimes there are things about culture that your new hires don't know, very sort of mechanical or very sort of trivial things even, like am I allowed to leave the building in the middle of the day to walk a block down the street to get a coffee at Starbucks and come back? Like, is that something that the culture supports or frowns on, right? And of course, a good culture would say, yeah, that's okay as long as you're getting your work done, right? So those are the kinds of things about culture that require sort of specific communication. But it also occurred to me that at the same time, there's specificity in culture that needs to be that benefits from being communicated correctly and just clearly to the organization. But there's also this idea of, hey, I'm not going to necessarily build culture in my organization by talking about my culture all the time in one-on-ones with in random or arbitrary one-on-ones with my staff or the people working for my company over the course of the day. It's more just a matter of being present and letting the culture, observing what the culture is and influencing it through those conversations to move it in the direction of where I want.
I think what you're hinting at is a very integral part of walking the talk narrative that requires leaders to detach themselves from some things that they feel they absolutely need to own. I'm a strong advocate for having no policy manuals in an organization. We're not living in the 80s. You should have limits and authorities, guardrails and checks. Definitely, those should exist. But what I mean is that there should not be a lunchtime policy to begin with. Otherwise, and it's very relevant to the greater conversation we're having globally these days, is that are we encouraging more of a dictatorial spirit in an organization where my word is law and if you don't follow that law, you're an outsider? Or are we giving you space to be yourself in an environment which has natural thresholds? So if you cannot deliver a certain goal, you're accountable. That goes without saying. But if you're delivering your goal, how is it my concern that if you're talking to me while on a treadmill or you're sitting behind a desk? Very
Right.
difficult for some of the leaders to really accept and buy into this narrative, by the way. It's not that easy. I would think that I've had my personal share of flack from my superiors when I try to encourage it, because there's a fine line that you have to strike. Give people too much freedom and they will abuse it. So you have to also give them the right amount of control matrix around it. But what I'm trying to say is having a leave policy versus having no leave policy. You can be on a leave when you want to go, but you have to be on work when you don't have to be on leave. So there is a natural human accountability which is one of the biggest achievements of the Western civilizations inherently, that we self audit ourselves in our daily life. So why
Yeah.
can't we self audit ourselves in our workplace? Like we fall into a line when we enter a grocery store, but we are expected to sign in behind a desk. And since we have been as leaders asking people to do, they have been reluctantly doing that. Had we encouraged that confidence in them to, like, we trust you, you'll do that, 5 out of 100 people might abuse it, but the 95 will own the organization like their own. And that's what I mean by collective ownership, that leaders really need to, without letting go of authority and guardrails, detach themselves from a sense of authority that comes with it. That should always lie with the employees.
That's huge. You know, so many people think of themselves, think of leadership as having sort of there's an authority aspect to it, and there is, but what does that mean? Does it mean that, that there's gravity when the leader speaks, because it's earned and it's attracted to them, or is it, sort of this, well, I'm the leader, so people should do what I say, or that I should set rules and these sorts of things. It's really, really interesting, and we could talk about that all day long. I know we have a couple of the questions here, but just you really made me think, and there's a lot to unpack there, and really kind of just stepping out of that, but stepping out of that mindset and understanding that maybe your job as a leader is more to observe, and maybe this is to observe it and respond in the most effective ways. And maybe this is a good segue into the next question, in a way, right? Because there are day-to-day mechanics. We talked about this, in terms of, that you can use to nudge culture, without what can you do in these, terms of nudging culture on a day-to-day basis without making the culture sort of a bureaucratic thing, or a performative thing, but make it sort of genuine and real.
I think two things go hand in hand, and it's really about balancing both. Freedom to act comes with a sense of accountability. As leader, my role should be to define what that accountability threshold is and then hold people accountable to it. But then the process of how people achieve their goals should be less and less my concern and more their ownership. It's because and if somebody has been a true leader, they will tell you right off the bat that being a leader is exactly the antithesis of having authority. A leader needs to fall down to the level of the team that they're leading so that they can elevate the team to the level they are at.
Yeah.
Most of the time, the frustration that people would feel is that the team's not understanding what I'm telling them, even though the document is in front of them. A easier solution is to admit that maybe my way of communicating the problem to the team is not efficient enough for the message to get across. This is the gap most leaders fail to cross, because that's an internal gap which we have to fight ourselves against and then achieve. But provided that you've developed, and that's my role as a chief culture officer, reminding leaders that they can rise up to that occasion and enabling it. So that's exactly what I do. But if you give people freedom to act and they know that they will be accountable against a goal, you're encouraging healthy, efficient bias for action. And that's how it should be. Especially with the current generation, which is now not only social media native but AI native, and that can tie into our later discussion as well, is that who would you lead going forward? If it's a bunch of algorithms and they don't have emotions, where does your authority go there? Like, you'll just bash a few keys in microaggression, like what purpose would it solve, right?
Yeah.
So we're taking that leap towards automation and AI, but we don't realize that there are culture deficits that we were not able to fill when we were working in a multi-generational environment. The younger generation by default needs authority. The older generation by default has to enforce accountability.
Yeah.
A good culture is where both are balanced in an organic matter without the need of strict documents and protocols to guide people around. So nudges is the right word.
Yeah, yeah. You know what? This is actually applicable outside of the workplace too, as a parent, also, right? And it just occurred to me. I know that you and I both have young children, and you're giving me ideas. Um, let's get to our last question here in the few minutes we have left. So looking ahead, we weren't going to get through a podcast in HR where we weren't going to talk about AI, right? So let's talk about it. How do you expect culture to change, as more agentic AI become, true participants in work? What should leaders do now, to prepare for that, against the backdrop of what we've discussed already today?
I think there are two aspects of it. One is what I was alluding to earlier, is that it challenges the very core of who we are as human beings, which is that all of us are a little bit pretentious. So most of your existing organization is proving your capability in comparison to your peers in a way that you come across as better than your peers, so that you get that promotion, you get that growth, and you become more accepted into the hierarchy of the organization. As things go more towards technology, that thing fades away faster than anything. You are admitting that you're outsourcing your own workload to a machine which can do it better than you. So you can't be pretentious about your capability. There is no there's no gray now. It's always black and white. The decisions work like algorithms. So you have to, as a leader, start wearing the strategic hat more often, and that's when you will see that being operationally engaged in managing your teams day to day has never been your superpower. Your superpower has always been your strategy. It's just that in the old workspace, the time was required to manage processes, SLA exceptions, escalations, firefighting, all those things were taking you away from your strategic job. So AI should not be seen as a threat, even though it will take away your pretensions faster than anything. It should be seen as an enabler, that it will give you the time to think through the strategic aspects of your job. And every one of us, even at the bottom tier of the organization all the way to the top tier, has that need. So some of the jobs, of course, will become redundant, but a typical workforce of tomorrow will be one that will have a boomer, a millennial, a Gen Z, and a bunch of AI agents working together.
Yeah.
And they all need to have that rhythm which hasn't been defined by any reference point up to date. We're living in sort of the second industrial revolution. We still have to find the marks of our time who would write the thesis that will enable the labor rights of tomorrow. All that needs to be discovered. But in absence of that, we need to understand that machines are here to stay, not as replacements of what we do, but as augmentation of what we are capable of achieving. So and you can see it even today. An email is written by AI, read by a person who is using an AI agent to take action on that email, and both of those employees currently think that they're effective. But whereas it's AI doing that job. So until
Yeah.
they discover their real meaning of their job and discover it fast, they will become redundant. So if their entire purpose was to send that email, that job is solved. So they need to discover that.
Well, you know what? It's, and just to put a fine point on that, AI is forcing us to figure out just exactly what it is that makes us human and real fast. So maybe there's hope. Maybe with this nudge, we'll finally sort of get to the bottom of this thing that there hasn't been sort of a clear and present compelling rationale reason to do so until now. It's been, as opposed to just being sort of this thing that they talk about in the philosophy classes in college. This is really interesting, Shail, and I know that we have a lot to talk about. We may have you on again for another discussion around this. But thank you so much for joining me for the podcast. It's been a very illuminating conversation.
No, I'm glad I could do that. It's been lovely to be here, and I look forward to joining you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Future of Workforce Management and Payroll Insights by HR.com. We hope today's episode brought you valuable insights and fresh perspectives on the future of payroll and workforce management. Be sure to check out more episodes and explore resources at HR.com/podcast or wherever you listen to podcasts. Until next time, keep innovating and making a difference in the world of payroll and workforce management.